Welcome back to Game of Theories, where I introduce theories of management, administration, and leadership. In this video, I'll introduce social identity theory and the leadership theory that builds on social identity theory, also known as social identity theory of leadership. Have you ever wondered how being part of a group shapes your identity? Social identity theory explains just that. It provides insight into group dynamics, intergroup relationships, team development, leadership, social networks, human resources, diversity management, and organizational culture. Social identity theory suggests that we tend to evaluate our in group more favorably than out group in order to achieve a positive self concept. However, this can result in disparate treatment of members of the out group, including unfair discrimination, stereotyping, and prejudice. In other words, we often view our own group as superior to others, which can lead to negative attitudes and behaviors toward members of different groups. First, what exactly do we mean by social identity? It's all about different social groups we belong to, whether that's based on gender, age, religion, organizational membership, ethnicity, and so on. These groups give us a sense of belonging and validation and help to shape our self concept. When choosing which groups to identify with, people tend to select those that offer the most positive attributes, which can then be applied to their own self concept. But it's important to note that social identification is not the same as internalization, which involves integrating values, attitudes, and other characteristics. Here is an example of the difference between social identification and internalization. In the context of sports teams, I may identify strongly with a particular sports team and feel a sense of belonging and pride as a part of that group. However, I may not necessarily share all of the team's values, such as their strategies, tactics, and organizational structure. On the other hand, internalization involves a deeper level of integration where a person actively seeks to adopt the values and practices of a different culture or organization. For example, a business leader working in a foreign country may seek to integrate the local culture by learning the language, customs, and business practices in order to build stronger relationships and improve communication effectiveness. In both social identification and internalization, there is a desire for connection and belonging. But the level of integration and commitment differs. Social identification may be more superficial, while internalization involves a more comprehensive adoption of values and practices. In Game of Thrones, we can see an example of the difference between social identification and internalization through the character of Jon Snow. Jon Snow identifies strongly with the Night's Watch, who guards the northern border of the Seven Kingdoms. Jon Snow feels a sense of belonging and pride as part of the Night's Watch. However, Jon Snow's relationship with the Night's Watch is not the same as his relationship with the Wildings, a group of people who live north of the Wall and are often seen as enemies of the Seven Kingdoms. Over time, Jon Snow begins to develop a deeper understanding and empathy for the Wildings, and he even falls in love with one of their members. Although Jon Snow still identifies strongly with the Night's Watch, his relationship with the Wildings represents a more comprehensive form of integration or internalization, where he actively seeks to adopt their values and practices, such as their respect for nature, their rejection for the rigid social hierarchy of the Seven Kingdoms. Another concept of identity fusion was proposed in the paper Identity Fusion, the interplay of personal and social identities in extreme group behavior. Identity fusion refers to an extreme form of social identification in which an individual's personal and collective identities become fully fused, while social identification and internalization are broader concepts that encompass a range of ways in which individuals may form and integrate their identities in relation to groups. In identity fusion, people may see themselves as being inseparable from the group or organization they're part of, feel a deep sense of connection and commitment to the group, and may be willing to engage in extreme and even self sacrificial behaviors to protect or advance the group's interests. Identity fusion can have both positive and negative effects on behavior and attitudes. On the positive side, identity fusion can promote cooperation, cohesion, and commitment within the group or organization as members work together towards shared goals or values. Soldiers in a close knit military unit may experience identity fusion, feeling a deep sense of oneness and loyalty to their fellow soldiers and to their country. This can lead to a strong commitment to their mission and a willingness to make sacrifices for the safety and the well being of their unit. On the negative side, identity fusion can lead to extreme or violent behavior towards individuals or groups seen as outside the fused groups, as well as a reluctance to critically evaluate their own group's beliefs and actions. Cults may use identity fusion to indoctrinate members into an extreme ideology. This leads to a loss of personal autonomy and the willingness to engage in extreme behaviors that may harm themselves or others. Why do we identify with certain groups more than others? This tendency is rooted in the way our brains process social information, which refers to any information that is relevant to our understanding of the social world around us, including information about other people, beliefs, opinions, attitudes, social norms, values, and cultural practices. Examples of social information include facial expression, body language, tone of voice, and other nonverbal cues, such as eye contact and touch, that convey emotions and attitudes. Social information is an important aspect of social cognition, which is the study of how people perceive, remember, and interpret social information. Social information processing refers to the various cognitive processes involved in understanding and using social information, such as attention, perception, memory, and decision making. When we encounter other people, our brains automatically characterize them based on various social cues, such as race, gender, age, and other attributes. This characterization process is known as social characterization. Why do our brains process social information in this way? It has been considered as an adaptive mechanism that helps us make sense of the complex social world around us. Once our brains have categorized others, we start to form impressions and attitudes about them based on our own past experiences and cultural influences. This process is known as social evaluation, and it is influenced by a wide range of factors such as personal values, social norms, and cognitive biases. Over time, as we encounter members of certain groups more frequently and form more positive impressions of them, we may start to identify more strongly with those groups. This process is known as social identity formation, and it influences the way our brains process information, such as our attentional biases, memory, and emotional responses. For example, when we identify strongly with a particular group, we may be more likely to attend to information that is relevant to that group and to remember it more accurately. But here is where social identity theory becomes particularly intriguing. Our identification with a group can also lead to the creation of in-group prototypes and out-group stereotypes. Essentially, we start to see members of our own group as similar to ourselves, while viewing members of other groups as different and maybe even inferior. Here, in-group prototype refers to perceived characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors that are considered typical or ideal for members of a particular social group. It represents the shared norms and values that define the group's identity and distinguish it from other groups. For example, the in-group prototype of a political party includes characteristics like ideology, values, policies, and commitment to social change. By identifying with the prototype, people may feel a sense of belonging and derive a sense of self esteem and pride from being associated with the political party. In group favoritism can even occur with minimal interaction, as people tend to naturally gravitate towards those who share their beliefs and values. At the same time, the in group prototype can also lead to out group stereotypes, which yield negative outcomes like discrimination and conflict with out group members. For example, members of the marketing department may stereotype members of the IT department as being uncreative, lacking in social skills, or overly focused on technical details. Similarly, members of the IT department may stereotype members of the marketing department as being shallow, overly concerned with appearances, and lacking in technical expertise. These stereotypes can be harmful because they can create tension and conflict between different departments. They can also lead to negative attitudes and behaviors toward the members of the outgroup, such as dismissing their ideas or devaluing their contributions. A member of the marketing department may ignore input from the IT department when developing a new website, or a member of the IT department may dismiss the marketing department's feedback on the new software application. To combat outgroup stereotypes within an organization, it is important to promote collaboration and understanding between different departments. This can involve encouraging cross-departmental teamwork, facilitating open communication, and focusing on shared goals and objectives rather than differences. An analogy that could be used to describe the two sides of social identity is that of a coin. On the one side, social identity can provide a sense of belonging and self esteem, while on the other side, it can create misunderstandings and conflicts. These two sides are inseparable and must be considered together to fully understand the implications of social identity theory. Like a coin, social identity has both a positive and negative side, and we must be aware of both aspects in order to navigate the complex social landscape effectively. The question is how to create a shared social identity. Creating a positive social identity involves much more than just being part of a group. It requires a deep understanding of the nature of intergroup relationships, including factors like legitimacy, status, permeability, and stability. It is about finding similarities within groups, while at the same time depersonalizing individuals outside of those groups. The goal is to integrate prototypical characteristics that differentiate us from other groups while still maintaining our own unique identity. But finding the right balance between shared characteristics and individual uniqueness can be very tricky. And it often involves cognitive processes that can have both positive and negative outcomes. On the one hand, cognitive assimilation into the in group prototype can lead to positive attitudes, greater cohesion, and a sense of shared norms and values. But it can also lead to negative outcomes like stereotyping, ethnocentrism, and discrimination against outgroup members. For example, members of one ethnic group may develop negative stereotypes of another ethnic group based on their differences in appearance, language, or culture. A nationalist who identifies strongly with their own country may view other countries and cultures as inferior or threatening. It is also important to note that the social structure of groups does not establish equal status for all groups. Dominant groups may seek to maintain the status quo by exercising their power and status, while subordinate groups may seek social change to improve the positive position of their group. How to apply social identity theory to administration, management, and leadership. People's work related identities are shaped by daily work interactions and their roles, tasks, activities within an organization. Social identity theory of leadership is a pattern of leadership behavior that emphasizes the importance of social identity in shaping leadership processes and outcomes. Grounded in social identity theory, the social identity theory of leadership proposes that great leadership is rooted in leaders and followers seeing themselves as part of a common group, sharing a sense of we and us. The social identity theory of leadership suggests that to be open to each other's influence, individuals need to recognize not only their personal identities, I and you, but also their shared social identity, we and us. Leaders' ability to influence others depends on their engagement with a social identity that is shared by both leaders and followers. This can take different forms, but the most compelling proposition in the research literature is that leaders will be most effective when they embody what it means to be one of us. This is known as leader group prototypicality. When followers perceive that a leader represents a shared social identity that they themselves belong to, it creates trust in the leader and gives them strong basis to influence group members. In an article titled Leadership as a Social Identity Management, introducing the Identity Leadership Inventory to assess and validate a four-dimensional model, researchers propose an instrument developed to measure identity leadership, which included four dimensions. First, identity prototypicality, which means being one of us. A leader is seen as a representative of a specific group that the leader and the followers share membership of. This perception of the leader as representing a shared social identity fosters trust in the leader and gives them a basis to influence group members, which ultimately increase the effectiveness of their leadership. The more prototypical a leader is of a specific group, the more they are perceived to embody what it means to be one of us, and the more effective they are in influencing group members. During the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant, the Union Army general, displayed identity prototypicality by portraying himself as one of the common soldiers rather than a superior officer. He dressed simply, shared in the soldiers' hardships, and slept alongside his men in the field. This behavior helped to create a stronger sense of unity and shared identity among his troops, who saw him as a representative of their group rather than an outsider. George McClellan was a counterexample of identity prototypicality during the Civil War. As a Union general, he was seen as more concerned with his own reputation and political aspirations than with the goals and values of the Union Army. Despite outnumbering the Confederate Army, McClellan hesitated to attack and allowed the opportunity for a decisive victory to slip away. After the battle, he claimed that He had saved the Union from defeat rather than acknowledging the missed opportunity. He also had a tendency to distance himself from his subordinates and show favoritism to certain officers, which undermined his effectiveness as a leader. As a result, he was eventually relieved of his command by President Abraham Lincoln. The second dimension of social identity theory of leadership is identity advancement, which means doing it for us. Leaders focus on promoting collective interests of the group and ensuring that group members feel a sense of identity advancement through their participation in the group activities. John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the United States, exemplifies identity advancement. As a strong advocate for American independence, Adams worked tirelessly to promote the idea of a unified American identity that transcended the individual identities of the 13 colonies. He recognized the importance of establishing a shared sense of identity among the colonists in order to achieve their common goal of independence from British rule and the establishment of a new nation based on the principles of freedom and democracy. In his role as a delegate of Continental Congress, Adams played a key role in drafting the Declaration of Independence, which asserted the right of the American colonies to govern themselves and declared their intention to establish a new nation. Adams saw the Declaration as a means of promoting a shared American identity and rallying the colonists behind a common cause. The third dimension of the social identity theory of leadership is identity entrepreneurship, meaning crafting a sense of us. Leaders take an active role in defining and promoting a shared identity that is meaningful and attractive to group members and motivates them to work towards achieving common objectives. Identity entrepreneurship requires leaders to have a deep understanding of their group members' values, beliefs, and goals, and to be able to craft a compelling narrative that resonates with them. It also involves creating a sense of urgency and a clear vision for the future that inspires group members to take action and work toward a common goal. On July 27, 2004, at the Democratic National Convention in Boston, Massachusetts, a relatively unknown Illinois state senator was given the opportunity to deliver the keynote address. That speaker's name was Barack Obama. In the speech, Obama spoke about his own personal stories as a son of a Kenyan father and a white American mother, and he emphasized the importance of coming together as a nation and to address the challenges facing the country. He famously said, "There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a Black America and a white America and a Latino America and Asian America. There is the United States of America." The speech was praised for its message of unity and inclusiveness. It not only captivated the audience, but also catapulted him to national prominence. With his impeccable oratory skills and message of hope, that speech marked the beginning of Obama's meteoric rise in American politics that would eventually lead him to become the first African American president of the United States. The speech itself is considered one of the greatest political speeches of our time, and it serves as a reminder of the power of words and how an identity entrepreneur can define and promote a shared identity that resonates with people. The fourth dimension of social identity theory of leadership is identity impresarialship, which means embedding a sense of us. Identity impresarials act as orchestrators of identities that already exist within the group to promote group cohesion and achieve collective goals. They may use various strategies to achieve this, such as storytelling, rituals, symbols, and shared experiences. An example of identity imprensorship is Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership in the civil rights movement. He not only built a social movement around social rights, but also actively managed the movement's public identity. He was skilled in crafting messages that resonated with broad audiences and in orchestrating events that showcased the movement's moral authority. King's famous I Have a Dream speech, delivered during the March on Washington in 1963, is an example of how he used his platform to articulate a shared vision and identity for the civil rights movement. His use of rhetorical devices and appeals to shared values helped to galvanize the movement and inspire millions of Americans to support the cause of racial justice. In addition to his speeches, King also organized peaceful protests and acts of civil disobedience that served to reinforce the movement's identity and values. He worked tirelessly to ensure that public image of the movement aligned with its goals and values, and his efforts were instrumental in securing some of the most significant civil rights victories in American history. Thanks for watching this video on social identity theory and social identity theory of leadership. If you are interested in learning more about theories of management, administration, and leadership, be sure to tune in to my future videos.